Okay, wonderful. Well, I think we can get started then, since it's past 2 p.m. Central Time and everyone is here. So thank you so much for joining us for the third event of the academic year of this Consortium for Central American Politics at Tulane. This Thursday, we have a really exciting event. We're going to be talking about the recent controversies around the Panama Canal. For instance, the declarations of US President Donald Trump around alleged foreign influence on the canal. And we have experts of Panamanian politics who will share their perspectives. So thank you very much for joining us. The event will be moderated by Constantino Urcullo Fournier. Constantino Urcullo is the academic director of the Center for Political Research and Training in Costa Rica for Tulane University and a professor of political science at the University of Costa Rica. He served on Costa Rica's Presidential Commission on Democratic Governance as an advisor to the president and as a member of the Legislative Assembly. And relevant to this panel, Dr. Urcullo also has written several books on foreign influence and superpower influence in Central America. And we're really happy to have him joining us today for moderating this debate. Dr. Urcullo, thank you so much, and I let you introduce our panelists.
Okay, thank you very much. Josephine, no? Okay. Thank you very much. We have a lot of common, la langue française, but we have to talk in English today and not in Spanish or in French. But anyway, I would like to introduce you first to Alfredo Castellero, who is a member of the CEPS in Panama. The CIEPS means Center for Investigaciones en Estudios Políticos y Sociales. El Centro de Estudios, el CIEPS, es una institución muy reconocida en Panamá, creo que con conexiones con la Universidad Santa María la Antigua, por lo menos en el pasado cuando yo estuve por aquellos lares. Y hoy es dirigido, según tengo entendido, por un buen amigo que es Manolo Alcántara, quien fuera profesor en la Universidad de Salamanca. El otro panelista que nos acompaña hoy es Juan Diego Alvarado, quien está terminando sus estudios de doctorado en la University of Maryland, en College Park, y es doblemente costarricense y panameño, ¿verdad? Pero más que todo se ha criado en Panamá y bueno, tiene ese acentito tan hermoso que tienen los panameños y lo reconocemos también por eso, pero sabe pronunciar la R costarricense como un nativo. Bueno, yo les doy la más amable bienvenida a ustedes y yo traía 3 preguntitas para iniciar la conversación y había pensado que podríamos dedicarle unos 12 minutos cada uno y luego tener una segunda ronda y después de esa segunda ronda abrirnos a preguntas. O sea, estaríamos hablando de 12 y 12, 24 minutos y después en la primera ronda y después sumamos unos 10 en la segunda intervención y dejamos un espacio para preguntas. Yo traje 3 preguntas que se me ocurrieron viendo el título de nuestro encuentro. Y the first one, excuse me, would be, it is possible to speak about soberanía, sovereignty, being inside the sphere of influence of a superpower, being inside of what has been called the United States backyard, and specifically in the case of Panama, being administering as a country and as a state such a strategic way. The second question, I will leave you the 3 questions and then we could go back to each one of them. my second question is, what are the challenges for small countries facing the economic protectionism of the new U.S. administration? That will be my second question. And the third question, I just leave you in front of the declarations of the new Southern Command Chief, Admiral Alvin Halsey, that when arrived to Panama, I think that it was yesterday or the day before yesterday, and I'll read it in Spanish. U.S. Embassy, Panama. El almirante Alvin Halsey está en Panamá para reunirse con los líderes de la nación para fortalecer la cooperación y discutir desafíos regionales críticos, incluidos los esfuerzos para proteger el área del canal de la influencia y control del Partido Comunista Chino. Y esto no es nada fortuito, sino es un comunicado oficial de la Embajada de los Estados Unidos en Panamá. I'll switch back to English. The idea here is, would in front of the coup de force, in words of the Trump administration, that will be enough, or would that protection of the Panama Canal in front of the Chinese Communist Party, that's the reading of the Trump administration, would require military force, or the installation of a new military base for the United States in the Darien province? That's what I've heard from my friends in Panama, that the idea of having a detention center for the migrants or the deportees in that new installation would be the equivalent of a military base inside of Panama, outside of the canal, but very near the canal. Okay, so I'll leave you guys with your words and your speeches, and let's start in alphabetical order. Let's go first with Alvarado and then with Castillero. A, B, C. Alvarado, what do you think?
Hi, thank you, Professor Urcuyo, and thanks everybody who is organizing this panel and tuning in. It's a pleasure for me to be here and participate in this event. So I want to first talk about your first question regarding sovereignty, which I think is of particular importance because throughout most of Panamanian history, but particularly during the 20th century, the struggles for sovereignty, nationhood, national identity were the organizing principles of Panamanian politics, were the struggles around which many of the main political currents and political events were organized around and articulated, and have been crucial for understanding and organizing whatever it is we understand Panamanian political identity to be. However, I think this event has been particularly shocking, not only because of the gravity of the remarks and the seriousness of its implications, but because within Panamanian politics and within Panamanian society, the nationhood issues and the sovereignty issues regarding the canal were resolved at least a generation ago. So when the Panama Canal was handed over to Panamanian administration, and then underwent in 1999, and then a few years later, there was a referendum to approve a series of enhancements to the Panama Canal structure, this ampliación, as we call it. Since then, the Panama Canal has been pretty much outside of political dispute. There has been a consensus around what the Panama Canal pretty much is, even though there are growing concerns and among the population of whether the benefits of the canal are evenly distributed. But that is a different question from who actually owns the canal. So the question of sovereignty here, I think, is particularly important because it is at the center of, as I said, the way that Panamanian politics was structured, in at least in the way that they have created the party system that dominated for most of the beginning of the 21st century, but that now seems to be more fragmented. So there seems to be a disconnect in something that does not seem at the moment salient, particularly salient because it has been a historically pretty much resolved issue, at least in political contestation, but has been brought up again in a way that, because the current party system is so far from the those important milestone moments of Panamanian national development, or the question of the nation, or the question of nationhoods, they are ill-equipped right now to articulate a response, a political response or a discourse around this to make sense of this issue. So there is a little bit of what I feel is that politics and history right now in a way are kind of out of step with each other. Like the domestic politics at the moment does not seem to be properly metabolizing what is happening in the IR sector, in the foreign policy sector. And I think Alfredo can expand a little bit on the more international dimension of it. But right now, I feel like when we talk about sovereignty, it is more a question in Panama of whether that conversation can be reactivated and what form that reactivation of the talk about sovereignty takes place. So now I think that's pretty much for that. And then I'll defer to Alfredo.
Hi, great to be here with all of you. Excuse my very rusty and unpolished English. And by the way, Constantino, we met about 20 years ago. You may or may not recall it, when we were negotiating, you on behalf of Costa Rica, me on behalf of Panama, the Bambito Declaration, la Declaración de Bambito, on the demilitarization of Central America, commemorating the 60th anniversary of the treaty limits treaty between Panama and Costa Rica. Following on Juan Diego's Panamanian viewpoint, I guess, following on what you said, Constantino, I could not agree more. I would, as he advanced, emphasize the international aspects of this. In your question, you mentioned as in passing something that I think is essential. In your first question, that is, because you began by stating that could a country be sovereign when it is within the sphere of influence of a major power, of a superpower? Now, you're already there using a loaded term, with which I agree, by the way, but it is a loaded term, which is that of a sphere of influence. Which is a term that wasn't used normally not that long ago. I mean, it had kind of receded as part of a long-forgotten geopolitical lingo, and it has returned. And I maintain that it has returned as part of the return of history, as it may. Not that long ago, just over a month, I think, the Finnish president said that Europe was recovering from its vacation from history. History understood, of course, that that's history of great wars and great suffering for the great masses of humanity. And I think that we had our slumber from history, our vacation from history, which was between the handover of the canal and this moment we are currently living in. And during those 25 years, we thought that a small country could be respected fully by a superpower. Now, that thought, that mode of thinking, that attitude, part of, if you want, of our political culture as Panamanians, is being rudely shaken, as is currently for analogous reasons, but not identical, that of that belief of the Europeans in the current NATO, European Union order made to ensure peace and peace, safety, and prosperity in Europe. And it is my understanding that with that rude awakening into history, back into history, the type of history we're seeing reborn is that of the spheres of influence, analogous to, and I am not claiming it is identical to, but analogous to that imperial order, that imperial racial-based, xenophobic-based imperial order prevalent before World War I, which, by the way, goes very well with the order which, for different reasons, Xi, Putin, and certainly Trump seem to crave for, seem to have idealized in their worldview. If we are going into that world order, if we are going, so to say, back to the future, but in a reloaded manner, it will be very difficult for small nations on their own,
Mm-hmm.
to be able to maintain their sovereignty, their substantial independence in the face of superpowers. Having said that, and I'm not going to elaborate on this, but having said that, one can claim that, however, there is a way of facing superpowers, namely by multilateralism. That is, there is a manner that has already been successful, particularly in the case of Panama, emblematically worldwide in the case of Panama, of facing superpowers, which is through multilateralism and the respect of international law. Those should be the two pillars over which Panama or any other small country, this is, I think, a valid formula, not just for Panama, but for all small countries. Multilateralism, which entails solidarity and way beyond the regional sphere, and the respect for international law, public international law. So that's as far as I want to go in this round regarding the first question. Should I go immediately into the second one, or should I wait until Juan Diego?
If I may, I have something to add on to what you said, which I fundamentally agree with everything you said. And I think the particular challenge here is that as you lay out this most useful strategy for small countries of using multilateralism and international institutions and international law, it is worrisome that the current path that the current Panamanian government is taking does not seem to be that, because at the same time that Panama was being targeted in this sense of questioning sovereignty, questioning the control of the canal, and levying basically these types of threats, it happened at the same time as the United States president was also making remarks about Mexico and Canada, who among themselves were in a multilateral, or at least in a bilateral collaboration in the way that they frame and strategize in their response to this, and upon questions from journalists, the current Panamanian president has basically said that they are going to handle this, not in a multilateral way, but rather in a way that Panama is going to basically try to appease and negotiate on their own, which is, I think, it's a way to do it. I think it lines up with the current discourse in the country that we're in a privileged positions as having a type of special relationship with the United States historically, regardless of the many issues in the past that have happened. And I think relying on that is certainly a strategy, but I think there's a missed opportunity in foregoing multilateralism, particularly in these more convulsive times.
Should we go to the second question? Castillero?
I'm open to that.
No, you were ready. You were ready to start, so I'm leaving you.
As you wish. As you wish. I know Diego is also ready. We are always ready. So
okay.
I'll go ahead quite quickly. You mentioned the role of the visit of the Southern Command head to Panama yesterday and today, and that it formally states that it is, among other things, to analyze the regional situation and so on, what entails the Southern Command mandate, and in particular the presence of the Chinese Communist Party in Panama. I'll mention a couple of things regarding this. The first, that this is not entirely new. I don't want to make it seem less than it is. It is certainly very, very meaningful in the context it is taking place. But maybe we shouldn't overstate it, because his predecessor, Commander Richardson, came here. I don't know exactly how often, but I think I am not overstating it by saying that it was frequently and several times yearly. So in that regard, you could say that there is some level of continuity. You could say that, and we will only know, when the visit finishes and what it actually lo que arroja, what it produces, no. Having said that, as regards the issue of the Chinese Communist Party presence in the canal, I'd say the following: it is understandable that there is concern about the presence of Chinese companies in the country, insofar as there is little substantial independence between the companies and the state in the People's Republic of China. Having said that, this may seem repetitive, because I am sure you have read it often, you have heard it often, you have seen it often in TV interviews, but the claim that the canal is jointly or solely administered by China, be it by civilians or, as President Trump said, by the People's Army of China, is absolutely ludicrous. It is baseless, it is false, and it is, well, it is as sensible to say that, as respectful of other people's sovereignty, as claiming that Ukraine is responsible for the war of aggression by Russia against Ukraine. And it is for reasons like this, and I'll go with this a little bit back to the first question, that I think countries like Panama, like, if I may, Costa Rica, i.e. small countries, should be particularly solidarious, I guess is a word. I may be coining a new term in English, but they should be aware of the Ukrainian issue and be in solidarity with Ukraine. So yes, like in Ukraine, Trump and his cohorts are claiming something that is baseless in Panama. But clearly they want something. It is difficult to know exactly what with regards to the canal. This is an unfolding story. So whatever one can say is, to a large extent, speculative. So I'd rather not speculate, but I would say something that I think is of a bit of use, which is that while it may be that there will be no invasion, it may very well be that there will be no takeover of the canal, we have to take these threats seriously. President Trump has been making them since December 21, the day after Panama commemorated the 25th anniversary of the invasion. It was also within the celebration of the 35th year of the invasion. It was also within the celebration on December 31st of 25 years of the handover of the canal and the very successful administration of the canal by the Panamanians. So it was very symbolic. It was also close in time to January 9th, the Day of Martyrs in Panama, in 1964, when the presence, the American military presence, the takeover by the Americans of the canal and the adjacent areas, ended in a clash with Panamanian civilians. So it was very symbolic. And since then, all sorts of authorities have kept on claiming that they need and want the canal because the Chinese are here. Lastly, by Mr. Mauricio Claver Carone, That was the last time. And I think that they haven't returned to that in the recent days. Since February 12th, just 8 days ago, they haven't mentioned Panama. It is because they are now busy with Ukraine. But I'm sure they haven't forgotten Panama.
Alfredo, let me interrupt you and maybe
I have finished.
Juan Diego could elaborate on this too. When you analyze Mr. Rubio's trip to Central America, what is interesting and common and omnipresent is the rivalry with China. In Panama, it's the canal. In Costa Rica, it's Huawei. And yesterday, new development also, two members of Congress of Costa Rica were retired visas, the visas, because they were dealing or in the middle of conversations with the Huawei representatives. Oh, look, then you go to Guatemala, and Mr. Rubio says that, well, Guatemalans are doing the right thing because they maintain the relationship with Taiwan. Huh? That's China again. China emerges in the panorama also with Honduras. Huh? But the president of Honduras says that if they send deportees to Honduras, they will close the Soto Cano base in Honduras. But days after she says that, suddenly she goes back on the idea of reformulating the treaty of extradition with the United States and accepting the treaty. I mean, why do I make these statements or these affirmations? I think that the main contradiction of our time, to use that expression from Mao Zedong, is between the United States and China in general terms. Russia is there, and we could analyze that. But my idea and my question to you both is, how do we get into that big fight that are so small, and is really that big fight extending to Central America between China and the United States?
So I can go first. As I said, I believe that part of the problem here is an absence of multilateralism, but that absence is, I think, predicated also on difficulties in regional unity, particularly right now in Latin America. It seems to be one of the worst moments for organizing a unified response, be it Central America or South America or all of Latin America. But there seem to be, various ideological differences between, you have Bukele in El Salvador, you have Xiomara Castro in Honduras, and with different, let's say, relationships with democracy and development. So it makes it very difficult to see what an organized response would be like. But I think it's basically a question of unity and coordination on two levels. On the one hand is coordination at the regional level. So to what extent can regions organize together when they feel in a way that their sovereignty is impinged, which is in a way also, as Alfredo was saying, also product of history. It's important to remind that when the rise of China is happening in the 2000s, it's the peak of the moment when the United States is centering its attention in the Middle East and turning its back on Latin America. So in a way, like, yes, it is a question of different powers expanding their influence. It's also a question of countries being pragmatic in what opportunities present themselves. And I think that the Panamanian case is a case of this, of needing more investment to sustain a booming economic model over time. So they see the opportunity to establish relations with China, which is, a bigger market, a bigger economy. So they go that way. And I feel that on the other hand, the other level, which I think is crucial in particularly in democracies, autocracies don't have that problem so much, is the capacity to organize, on the one hand, a sense of unity within the country, that that there is a unified national response and in the interest of the country, and on the other hand, properly having strong institutions, particularly foreign service, which is, I think, a weakness in many of these states that are not fully equipped to actually enter in these stages of heated negotiation with bigger countries that in other circumstances would be otherwise.
Just go ahead, Alfredo, but don't forget about protectionism in the sense that how does protectionism affect Panama? Because the main business in Panama is the canal, but there are other things, the copper mine, the tourism, etc. Just don't leave aside that will be my request. Alfredo?
Yes, well, I'll take a bit from your question, and Juan Diego's statement. I'll begin with something Juan Diego hinted at, which is the difficulty of solidarity, of international solidarity, small country solidarity in these moments. And I think there is something that hasn't been pointed out, as far as I have seen from media, academia, and the like, which is that for the first time, perhaps since the Second World War, the diplomatic differences within Latin America are based on ideology. And this is important because, for example, Panama has, under several governments, particularly this one, a very aggressive campaign to be taken off the gray and black list of countries allegedly open to money laundering. And despite the fact that it has been very critical of countries such as, let's say, Brazil, for example, these countries made statements in solidarity with Panama following Trump's verbal attack, let's say, against Panama. Verbal threats, I think, is not excessive. However, countries with which Panama has a traditionally good relationship, let's say Costa Rica, certainly El Salvador, Ecuador, or Argentina, were countries that, despite a much better relationship than with other Latin American countries, let's think about Venezuela, with a country with which we don't even have diplomatic relationships, diplomatic ties at the moment, all these countries did not wish to manifest themselves in favor of Panama following Trump's threats to the canal and our country, and ever since. In fact, in a meeting at CELAC, this place where Latin American countries can meet and agree upon themselves, free of the let's say Northern Anglo presence, there was a proposal by Colombia to support Panama, and it was negated by Argentina in the strongest possible diplomatic terms. So a country with which we have good ties, no previous recent difference, suddenly opposes this. So it is telling you that what is moving now, our diplomacy in the region, and again, I have not seen this mentioned elsewhere. The closest is something along the lines that Juan Diego has been hinting at, is what is moving at is ideology. And this is new for our region, and it may very well impede that solidarity that we need, that small country solidarity that we need. Fine. Then we go on to the issue of protectionism and the Chinese presence in the region. And I'd say a couple of things. I think that there are elements of that. Certainly China is a major issue in the American threats towards Panama. protectionism, I think, in a much smaller way, particularly because Panama is a small market, a very open market, which is actually losing in commercial terms, and certainly in Trumpian terms, in every single free trade agreement. And I believe it is next year that the agricultural phase of the free trade agreement with the US is going to come into place. And that will actually affect our country significantly. A country whose agricultural sector has already been depleted by the policies of several governments. So I don't think in our particular case, protectionism is that big issue. It is a big issue not because of Panama, but because of the US, because of the passage through Panama of merchandise, through Panama through the canal of merchandise from China to the US and certainly to other Latin American countries. I think that's what's in play there. So it is a more subtle thing. The other issue that is at stake is that the canal has some importance also for China beyond the commercial issues because of the liquid and natural gas from Colombia that it makes use of. So affecting China at some level, China's use of the canal at some level could be of dual importance for China. So for China, this is an important issue, certainly. Now, do the Americans want to reassert their presence? That is evident. I think there is little to say in that regard more than just what comes from following the news. Should we have played the China card in another manner? I certainly think so. I think we should have played the China card in another manner, but that's a matter of criteria. What I think, and it's just a personal opinion as a Panamanian, a proud Panamanian, and somebody that believes in the neutrality of the canal and the international vocation of our country, is that we should have substantially diversified partners. Not just diversifying in a dual manner that has ended with us being in the middle of these two giants playing for power, but diversify it with investments from and with countries of South America and Europe primarily, but all commerce with an S at the end. As in Asians, what have you. We should have diversified, not just concentrated on those two as if they were pillars and as if they were eager and willing to work with each other, which was never the case. So that's my take on that. But anyhow, I think you want to follow up with another question, Constantino.
No. Let's give Juan Diego the opportunity to refer to this. Maybe, or we can continue with the questions. But my main question was at the beginning, and this past week has been really one of those moments where in a very few days there are changes that will affect humanity and the international system for decades. You know, that meeting in Saudi Arabia, the reaction, the approach of Russia and the United States and Putin, and China being silent. That's very interesting also. But my whole question in regard of this is, well, we're in the middle of a big play and we are small players. You have a big point from the point of view of policy, solidarity, alliances between the small countries, but that's difficult. How do you see it, Juan Diego?
Yeah, I do believe, I agree with you that this does seem to be one of those weeks where decades happen, certainly. I will say that, going to your question regarding what to make of all of this, I think it is, again, what I mentioned about whether the states are properly equipped to strategize in such a fast-moving policy environment or national policy environment. I don't think all the cards are clear, particularly what you mentioned in the last point about what China is going to do. And I think primarily, at least in the way that governments such as the Panamanian government navigate this, is in almost like in a two-stage game or a two-step game, in the sense that at the same time that the Panamanian government is navigating this, they are navigating multiple internal domestic policy crises, such as pension reform, what you mentioned about the copper mine, that are in themselves, in the way that the entire world trade panorama changes, how this affects the diversification of Panamanian economy. That is one of the reasons that led to prior governments to approach the mine in the first place, for instance, just to put an example. And another issue that I think is also unsaid here, that also sets, that is almost an unspoken issue because many of the actors don't believe it is real, is climate change. And I want to bring up climate change because the last time the Panama Canal was in the news was due to water shortages, due to in part because of climate change, and that had important effects on the fees that are paid for ships passing through the canal, which then President Trump is alleging that are unfair to the U.S. So I think those are important points to navigate in this matter, but I think it's still really uncertain. Then in one of those points, I think in also that was also part of the recent news cycle, was not only the global climate crisis, but also the migrant crisis, which Panama is a central issue in, and that Costa Rica is also playing a part in this role in receiving these deportation flights, which bring a whole lot of questions about in regards to the international order, about human rights, respect for international treaties, like how to deal with these issues, and what our smaller countries are, either by their own volition or by international pressure, being complicit to.
Okay, Alfredo. Well,
here I am.
do
Sorry.
you have something to say in regard of this?
Well, yeah. Let's see. A couple of things. I mean, you asked a while ago if what was the route, the route to follow diplomatically in a country such as Panama, and again, each country will have its particular route, its particular path. But in our case, it's more or less self-evident in regard to both multilateralism and international law. Because first of all, we happen to have this golden opportunity that we are currently sitting at the table in the UN Security Council.
Yes.
So that allows us to present a project of a resolution in that context, which of course will not get to be discussed because the US will be opposed to it. But that will already put it on the agenda, will put it on the table, will put it on the media. And following that, we should go then to the OAS, which is the depository of the neutrality treaty. And then in the US, where we have a better card to play, ensure that in the OAS, where we have a better hand to play with, ensure that the OAS discusses the issue and backs Panama on that issue. Furthermore, we should certainly lobby all countries threatened currently by the US, as they have lobbied each other, talked with each other, even coordinated with each other, as was the exemplary case of Mexico and Canada, which already Juan Diego mentioned, because I think that's a particularly good case. But also the case of Denmark. I mean, almost all other countries have had, perhaps because they have a different way in the international system. So I don't want to overstate the case, but they certainly seem to play at least a bit better the hand at their disposal. Moreover, we should talk with all signatories, almost 40 signatories of the neutrality treaty, There is some overlap among all the countries I am mentioning, but it is quite a bit of the 195 approximately members of the UN. That so if you add this that I am talking about, you have many dozens of countries that you have a magnificent excuse and opening to talk about this issue. Now, when we mentioned that you mentioned, Constantino, the mine, for example, at some point as one of Panama's economic motors and so on, which, as you know, insofar as it is an economic motor, now it's off, let's say, and it is likely to remain off for the time being. But at any rate, there was an interesting, let's say, to put it diplomatically, Chinese presence in our economy, which was in the mine, where there are different estimates that claim that there was anything between 20%, according to Rodrigo Noriega, up to 40%, according to Marcel Salamin, a negotiator with the mining company, of acciones.
Shares.
Shares, gracias. Thanks to both of you. Up to 40% of shares of the mine were allegedly of Chinese capital. Huh? And then in the canal adjacent areas, there is, of course, the issue of the famous ports on each end, in the Caribbean and the Pacific, and also some infrastructure built by Chinese companies in the adjacent areas or areas adjacent to the canal. Having said that, again, we didn't have any major or minor project built by the Belt and Road Initiative. So we did not incur into the debt trap in any way, because we did not incur into debt with China. What is important, the most important presence here of China is commerce, which is quite traditional. It's been a long way coming. And it includes things like the sales of cars and so on.
Excuse me for a minute, Alfredo.
Please continue.
We have almost 10 minutes left, and there are some questions there. I will ask a last question, which is a theoretical one that you started from it. Well, you know, the all imperialisms in the 19th century seem to are coming back in the sense that is force what counts and not international law. And no, the 19th century was the century of colonization of Africa by the European powers, and the century of the British imperialism. But my question goes in this way: diplomacy, yes; solidarity, yes; international law, yes. For me, international law is the defense of the weak. But what are we gonna do with that in the middle of a situation where Russia uses force, the United States threats to using force or transforming Gaza in the Mediterranean Riviera? No, how do we overcome that? I'll give you 2 minutes, both of you, and then I will read a very interesting question by Jimena de Ubaldia in regard of the waters of the canal, and then we'll be over with our webinar. Go ahead, please, for 2 minutes, and Juan Diego for 2 minutes afterwards. Or you want to start, Juan Diego, and then we go to Alfredo.
No, you can go ahead, Alfredo.
I'd say the following. First of all, I am very pessimistic in the short term, optimistic in the longer term, when hopefully we will still all be alive. In the short term, I am pessimistic because I really think that while Trump wants to remain a primus inter pares, he is willing to do an imperialistic partition of the world. I do believe that we're going to a sphere of influence system in which he will first try to reach out to Russia. Once he settles that, he will manage to sit down China in a situation in which China will already be a bit weakened because her junior partner will be closer to the US. But it will be a partition of spheres of influence. That's at least my understanding. I wish I were wrong, but that's what seems to be the case. And I think the first warning shots, in a quite literal manner, of that new order were given when Russia invaded Ukraine under a sphere of influence ideology expressly set by Putin. No? As regards what is a way of international law and multilateralism when confronted with the power of naked force and ambition, and the possibility to exert that ambition through that force. I think we're at a moment in which the new order has not yet fully formed. It is being formed. No? It is a bit like the twilight. We are at the twilight moment, that moment in which you get it so much light that you sometimes get blinded, but it is the light when the sun is coming down. No? And in the case of the world order, that means that we can still use the weapons at our alcance, within our grasp. No? And those are the ones we have. What we cannot do is renounce to them. We have to use them, no, and make the most of it. It may well be that all small nations that face the imperialistic powers in this era will be crushed like they were before the Second World War. It may be the case. I do not know. But what we cannot do is renounce to what small, limited, but real capacity we have to sit down and negotiate as if we were equals. That is something that we cannot renounce to.
Excuse me, Juan Diego?
Yes, very quickly, and to jump off what Alfredo was saying, jumping back to history, I think it's important to remember that after this imperial phase, the structure of the international order that was constructed throughout the 20th century, actually had two stages. There is a first one in which this liberal international order, these institutions, international law was formed, particularly in the center of the Western world. But it's important to remember that many of the principles that were important in globalizing international law and human rights were through the decolonization processes. That was one of the main, I would argue, it's in terms of numbers, is one of the main issues of the 20th century, which were crucial in determining concepts such as self-determination, South-South cooperation, and giving, and you mentioned thinking in theoretical terms. There are lessons to be learned from many points in history, and as Alfredo very insightfully mentioned, this moment is not closed. And on that second note, I think it's important to understand the political process through which this new international moment seems to be emerging, which is in the first few weeks of a new term, which is when governments tend to be stronger. And even though the United States is a submerging democracy, it is still a democracy where midterms will happen, where governments will have governance exhaustion over time. So it is still within the realm of possibility that the United States position, at least domestically, will be weakened in such a way that will limit its capacity to expand further down the line at least in the mid or long term. So there are also reasons to remain hopeful or be theoretically hopeful in what can only be described as fundamentally very uncertain terms. So the sand has the soil has not settled. As you mentioned, I think the big remaining question right now is like, we know very well what the United States is doing. We know very well what Russia is doing. We still don't know what China is doing and what role and what positions they're going to play in the new stage, whether that is beneficial or not for smaller countries.
Thank you, Juan. And I'll read the question by Jimena de Waldia. She says, amazing speakers. I have a question too. I am from Panama, so I have been tracking Panama Canal challenges and successes for years. In the last 2 years, we have faced an outstanding drought that happens every couple of years. And I am scared that now all of the energy of the ACP would be towards dealing with Trump rather than working on the canal to avoid putting Panamanian citizens' water access and levels of the canal down. How and when do you believe the ACP should move toward from Trump's conversations and focus on its national problems? So you have 2 minutes, each one of you, and then we'll be finishing and we'll back to Josephine, I believe.
Diego, adelante.
Yeah, I think this is the fundamental question, is how governments navigate their own national interest and how they navigate their positions in the international sphere. And I think in the case of Panama, which is what we're discussing, not in theoretical or comparative terms, but like the Panamanian case itself, it is a particularly difficult moment because there are, as I mentioned before, multiple crises at the time of environmental nature, of economic nature, of social nature in terms of pension reform and other issues that have in the past and may in the future provoke social unrest and mobilization and protest that this particular government has proven particularly eager to repress with police violence. So to the extent that Panama is able to navigate that or choosing what to prioritize, I think it will inevitably have trade-offs in what spheres will the government prioritize.
Thank you. Alfredo?
Well, thanks to Jimena for the question and the flattery to both the speakers. I think that the canal, as far as I understand it, is not abandoning the issue of water scarcity. At least that is my understanding. In fact, one of the challenges that the current government has in that polycrisis that Juan Diego was quite rightly alluding to, that agenda includes the Rio Indio. The word escapes to me in English, but
estuary waterway.
Yeah. So which would amplify significantly, which would widen significantly the access to water for the canal, and certainly also for drinking water for Panamanians. So those two issues would be addressed there. But there has been a traditional over 10-year-long opposition by social movements of the area to the Rio Indio waterworks. So and we are this clash with the U.S. comes at a very precarious moment in Panama, because we have, as you well know, had the major social movement, major environmental social movement, massive, still with roughly or close to 60% support in Panama against mining and the mine, a major copper mine in Panama. But it also includes the crisis or the alleged crisis of our social security sector, i.e. what we have equivalent to a welfare state, the water crisis that Jimena has alluded to, and there is a further issue that is pending from our transition to democracy 35 years ago, which is that there is the possibility of a constitutional convention that I believe may become the escape valve for the current government when all those things come together.
Sorry, Alfredo, I have to pass the floor.
Fine, I have finished.
Josephine?
Yes.
The boss now.
No, well, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to hear your perspectives. Thank you so much to our distinguished panelists for accepting our invitation and for sharing their thoughts. Thank you also to the audience. We're really excited to continue this engagement with Central American politics, which is one of our commitments here at CIPER, is to put the region at the center of conversations, which is something that is not very often done, we think, at U.S. institutions. So we really appreciate the engagement. Thank you as well, Constantino, for moderating the event. And we really look forward to future events and for future participation. So thank you very much to all the participants.
Thank you.
Thank you all.